Story 1. I have no idea, and that kind of scares me because unless people start fighting back on a large scale in the class war, there's no way it will be better than it is now. Story 2. A huge decrease in the middle class. There will be the working poor and wealthy elite with very few in between. Oligarchs will certainly be in charge, and there will not be much of a federal government. It will all be controlled state to state, leading to a huge separation of people by wealth, class, and political affiliation. Story 3. People will be angrier. The debt level will be so large that the government could reach the point where, instead of constantly cutting taxes and increasing spending, it has to do the opposite. People are unhappy now. Think how they will feel about worse services and higher taxes. Story 4. Imagine what we would look like if the Confederacy and the Union had struck a reunification deal rather than fought to the bitter end. Red states will be very red. Their intolerance for whatever they label wokeness will be acted on and be approved by a Supreme Court of the United States with a very strong conservative majority. At the same time, with the conservatives taking a defederalization or states' rights approach, blue states will be bluer. These changes will bring about a migration in which people whose lifestyle and worldview differ from the majority in the state they live in will resettle in a state where the majority better reflects their outlook. Thus, we will become a house divided against itself, unable to agree on much of anything. A failed marriage with spouses in separate bedrooms, barely speaking to each other, sometimes exchanging insults. Story 5. I have studied history, and it is pretty obvious how this will play out. Donald Trump will bring in an era of unbridled corruption. People will advance based on how much they pay and who they know. Corruption will permeate throughout society. Propaganda worked in 2024 and will continue going forward. It will be unpleasant, and I am not really looking forward to what our country is going to degrade into. Probably will get downvoted, but the truth hurts, and I really do not care. Story 6. My prediction. More divided, more frustrated in both obvious and subtle ways, less friendly, less polite, less kind, more selfish, more bound by our smartphones, less communicative, less educated, more unnecessarily expensive even in the heartland. Donald Trump is somewhat a cause, but mostly he's a symptom and the fitting culmination of societal malaise. My context. Every time I travel overseas anymore, or even to Canada, I already see societies that, however imperfect, still have robust social contracts, more competent governments, yes, even Canada's, and more polite citizens. Americans and their willful ignorance are bringing on their own downfall, and many don't even realize or understand it. This country has broken its social contract with me, despite my education, charity, and work ethic. It's also, in my view, violated the social contract with many members of my family. As such, I'm now working to strictly benefit myself going forward, so I won't need to live here as a senior citizen. Story 7. A culture further reduced into memes and easily digestible nuggets of content due to progressive degradation. Growing illiteracy rates and inequality in education. A poorer working class and middle class. A richer ruling class. And a heightened cold civil war. Story 8. Totally different from where we are today. There is too much opposing energy, angst, and borderline hatred for things to settle down where they are today. I don't know which side of what will come out on top, but I expect a major change in the next 10 years. Think 1929 to 1939 or 1959 to 1969. Story 9. I would rather live in blissful ignorance than spend my energy on questions like these. I cast my votes and then plug my ears and scream la la la, and hope for the best. It's pretty much the only way to not live in terror, in my opinion. Story 10. I think the wage gap between the rich and poor will grow larger and larger, and the middle class will shrink smaller and smaller. You will have the haves and the have-nots. Cities, towns, laws, and daily living will revolve around keeping the two groups segregated. Story 11. From what I have read, in the 1970s there was a general malaise everyone felt. But then the 1980s happened, so things can get better. However, it's going to take someone extraordinary to make Americans less polarized and more positive again. There are challenges on the horizon that aren't looking too good, like climate change. Story 12. Businesses as usual. No civil war, widespread collapse, theocracy, or any other big drama, just more inequality. Big technology companies will have a tighter leash on the government. Maybe there will be the first trillionaire. Story 13. You are stalking elk through the damp canyon forests around the ruins of Rockefeller Center. You'll wear leather clothes that will last you the rest of your life. You'll climb the wrist-thick kudzu vines that wrap the Willis Tower. And when you look down, you'll see tiny figures pounding corn, laying strips of venison on the empty carpool lane of some abandoned superhighway. Story 14. Realistically, domestically, high inflation will keep wages stagnant. High crime rates will be exacerbated by record levels of homelessness and poverty. Infant mortality will increase due to a lack of access to prenatal care, especially in poorer urban and rural areas and among people of color. The average life expectancy will hit a low not seen in years as cuts to Social Security, food assistance programs, and Medicare transition to a fully for-profit healthcare system. Although senior life expectancy has been declining for years, this trend will become evident in real statistics. More people will die from preventable diseases as healthcare becomes increasingly scarce due to doctor and hospital shortages resulting from the second Trump administration. Literacy rates will decline dramatically due to educational policies and underfunding. Many states, now instituting a faith-based education model, will eliminate all forms of sex education, leading to higher rates of sexually transmitted diseases and teen pregnancy, and consequently, an increase in infant mortality. I expect a gradual return of institutions for people with disabilities, along with modern versions of the ugly laws. This will not only affect disabled people but also those who do not conform to gender standards. Mental illness and LGBTQ individuals will be further criminalized. There will be a rollback of civil rights protections for women and minorities, and press freedom will be severely restricted. Internationally, there will be a major policy shift that endangers previous security treaties in Europe and Asia as the United States continues to favor Russia and embrace isolationist rhetoric, which is at odds with the interdependent world we live in today. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization will either exist on paper only, or the Germans will fully realize that the US is actively working against NATO's aims and will start investing in it. As the Chinese gain a stronger foothold in Southeast Asia and Africa due to questionable economic dealings and influence peddling, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan will find themselves isolated. This will shift Japan's stance from keeping the Japan Self-Defense Forces a purely home defense army to repealing the constitutional article that prohibits military engagement, resulting in the remilitarization of Japan and a resurgence of fascist nationalism. Due to poor foreign economic policy and unresolved tariff issues, the cost of imports will skyrocket and severely impact the economy. Many pundits may liken this situation to Great Depression levels, though this is doubtful. Shortages of microchips, raw materials, and other items will be worse than those experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. Story 15. We became powerful and rich after World War II because everyone else was broke, and the United States grew wealthy as the supplier to the world. That had a carryover effect into the 1960s. Since then, the United States has been on a very slow decline, but those glory years are long gone. The United States is going to have to face up to being poorer. That's not going to be an easy task. Story 16, hopefully better at gun control. Hopefully better access to healthcare. Hopefully marriage equality. Hopefully less oppressive because no world is free of oppression. I have these hopes to keep me sane, along with the hope that the rage we have over the current state of things fuels something productive for the good of mankind by then. Guess we'll see. Story 17. The next 10 years depend on what happens in the next 5 years. It is heavily dependent on what happens with the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa partnership. If we can survive until 2030 without incinerating each other, China's economy is going to crumble, and Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa will fracture and lose its influence. In that time, we will be opening more pathways to trade with South America. I would invest in railroad stocks and trucking companies in the next few years if I were you. If we make it past all of that, America will be sitting pretty well economically in 10 years. Or a smoldering pit of destruction. Hold on. Story 18. The Democrats will still keep pace with the Republican march to the right. So, In 4 years, when they regain the presidency, everyone will be too happy to notice that the Democratic National Committee is now to the right of Ronald Reagan. Story 19. Burbclaves, a free-for-all where you can run over the impoverished with your car without penalty. No public water. The bookmakers get to determine the outcome of the next 10 sports seasons, and death camps. Generally in even more obvious decline than now, but people will still be acting oblivious to it all. Story 20. It will be the same, but with more homeless people and more self-driving cars. Artificial intelligence is taking jobs, and nothing is being done about it. But hey, Amazon officially sponsors your tax returns. Yay! Story 21. Communist China is the biggest threat to the world but has been overlooked. They will control a good number of countries, including the United States and Europe, not by a weapons war, but by controlling all levels of technology and manufacturing, which they already have a majority of control over. The United States will be reliant on China-made products, and to gain compliance, they can simply stop shipping to the United States. Story 22. I have to make jokes so I don't cry. I love my country and I don't want to see it go down the path we're currently headed. Story 23. America is an irradiated wasteland. Within it lies a city. Outside the boundary walls, a desert. Cursed earth. Inside the walls, a cursed city, stretching from Boston to Washington, D.C. An unbroken concrete landscape. 800 million people living in the ruin of the old world and the megastructures of the new one. Mega blocks. Mega highways. Mega city one. Convulsing. Choking. Breaking under its own weight. Citizens in fear of the street. The gun. The gang. Only one thing fighting for order in the chaos. The men and women of the Hall of Justice. Juries. Executioners. Judges. Story 24. Partially extinct. If current weather patterns continue, we will have hurricanes wiping out the southeast, tornadoes and tsunamis wrecking the west, and in the middle, extreme climate change. 115 degrees Fahrenheit in the south in the summer, and minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit in the north in the winter. This assumes bird flu doesn't turn human to human next year with the same 50% mortality rate. This, of course, is after the glorious leader defunds and dismantles the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Following that, the new tariffs will cause the Great Depression 2.0, and all but the richest 1% will suffer. The middle class will disappear entirely. You will now be poor or rich, with poor being a tiered system of poor but surviving at the top rung, and poor and dying at the bottom. Story 25. Our government has trained us to react to new policies every 4 years, and the lack of long-term policies and cooperation in this country will lead this population nowhere that we can be proud of. We are like children anxious to see our parents fight each other, except it is 500 elderly individuals ruling over the lives of actual children who will deal with the consequences of their actions. I see us repeating this same cycle until someone makes a significant mistake that causes everyone to become tired of the arguments and take a stand. Story 26. As bad and bleak as things look now, that will become the reality. However, the people who believe in democracy and the will of the people will not be silenced or stopped because that is the will of Americans. The sides that are fighting and bickering don't represent the majority. I think the divide will become smaller between political lines. People will realize they have more in common than differences, and grassroots efforts will become more common and mainstream. I hope that those who are going to make the change will look to other countries to see what they're doing right. Healthcare is huge. Bigger than the dramatic events of people being gunned down. The fact that people can be denied coverage in their worst moment, when everything is on the line, when they have paid into healthcare, is criminal. Absolutely criminal. And it affects the American bottom line, including the economy. Healthcare is the most important thing a government can offer, and it's a basic human right. It should be enshrined in the Constitution and taken off the table as a political centerpiece. I have great hope for America and Americans. Difficult times are coming, but also change will happen. Story 27. A full-blown oligarchy, since that is what America voted in. The middle class will be further destroyed. Inflation will rise, costs will rise, and products will be harder to get with closed borders. Story 28. Likely not united, Trump sounds like he is doubling down on ridiculous tariffs overnight with no understanding of what will happen to industries that require months to decades to increase production to cover the portion that is currently imports and will become prohibitively expensive. Story 29. Fascism is well established. Canada is not the 51st state but a de facto protectorate. A paramilitary group similar to the Schutzstaffel is taking more and more place in the security apparatus. The world, recovering from a far-right hangover, is trying to start fresh and cut ties with the United States as much as they can. Story 30. Better. The entire country will have the case study of how liberals were trying to turn America into a communist country by silencing the crowd and implementing anti-common sense policies. Story 31. It will be the thriving example of what a cultured and respected society should look like. We will be brokering peace deals all over the globe, improving lives, and creating the peaceful utopia we deserve. I'm just kidding. It's going to be the most epic show ever. Story 32. Do not forget that there is also the chance of 8 more years of President Vance if Trump does well in his term. If not him, then Vivek, DeSantis, or someone else.